So, I get once a week a magazine called The Economist. If you've seen it, it's a wonderful magazine. You can literally buy it pretty much any place in the world. You know, and it's the same magazine. It's published in Britain, and I spent 2 summers in Poland teaching Polish high school kids English, and I would go into Warsaw once a week and pick up a copy of The Economist. It's a bit dense. It's like reading a novel each week, and I have them piled up, the ones that I didn't finish, and it's a real challenge. But anyway, each week they pick one person, and this is from like the whole world, to do an obituary on, right? It's just like one person who died in the whole world this week. And often it's like many people I've never heard of, a scientist from India, or medical researcher from Nigeria or whatever, or a human rights activist in El Salvador or something. A couple weeks ago they had Jane Goodall, so I had none of her. And then just recently, Dick Cheney. And it's funny, this is the November 6th, and I only saw this 2 days ago because, as I said, I've got them back issues piled up that I haven't finished. Anyway. You can see here, and it's a sort of a perfect intro to this. The most powerful vice president in American history died November 3rd, age 84. And he's most powerful because, and all of you, this is another thing I tell people, it's nice to have this crowd, because I can say something like, oh, do you remember where you were when John Kennedy was assassinated? And people do. And I teach people who don't remember 9/11, so that sort of thing. But you do remember Dick Cheney when he was president, and this will be a bit prejudicial on my part, but he, famously was put in charge of the search by George W. Bush, the search for a vice presidential candidate, right? And he did a worldwide search and ended up with Dick Cheney as the thing. And no, that's a true story. George W. Bush, who, in retrospect seems like a nice man. He paints pictures in Austin, and he and his wife are lovely people, but he was just like not a really bright guy, right? And so he was, he didn't know much of anything. It seems sort of extraordinary, but if you gave him a blank map of the world, he might not have been, before the war, able to point to where Iraq was, sort of thing. He was, as you know, the son of a very prominent family. His grandfather was senator from Connecticut. His father was president, and his father was a highly accomplished guy. And he was a rich kid, and knew a lot of rich people and got in nice positions, like he owned the Texas Rangers, and then he was the governor of Texas, and he had lots of nice contacts and stuff. And they put him up to run against Al Gore. Anyway, so you guys all remember that campaign and all. And then he got in there, right? And they were sort of wandering around. His signature issue prior to 9/11 was that he advocated for a gigantic tax cut. The 4 years before Bush was president, Bill Clinton's administration had turned out surpluses for 4 years in a row, right? This is just a massive, a massive thing, because now, the national debt, they have that sign in Times Square, New York, and it's too big to read the number, but they actually turned out 4 years. So they were, and of course there was the old joke about the lockbox, because Al Gore, when he was running, what are you going to do with those surpluses? And he was going to put it into closed funds for Social Security and Medicare. Anyway, but when Bush got in, being a Republican, he said that that's the people's money and it should go back to the people, right? And so there was a giant tax cut, which wasn't really helpful when we had the massive military buildup after, the war in Iraq. From the beginning, Bush's people had an agenda, which was to remake the Middle East, right? Remake the Middle East. It's an interesting thing to note that currently the United States is the world's largest producer of oil. But scroll back to the 90s or 70s or whatever with that. Remember we used to have to, every other day, get your gas and that sort of thing at the gas station. When you scroll back there, we were really afraid that we were at the mercy of other people, other societies for our energy resources. And so remaking the Middle East and having it as, having its leaders be close allies of the United States and help us with, funding our gas, our cars and other uses of gas, that was really important. It's interesting because now with the fracking, we are now the largest producer. That won't last forever, right? Because we're sucking out the stuff that didn't come out when you used to have the gushers. And so that'll run out, and one hopes, I think even the leaders hope that there'll be an alternative sources. I mean, there are plenty that they just, anyway, there are plenty available that they're not exploiting. But anyway, since the fracking, but that wasn't on the horizon, in 2001. And then there was the 9/11, and they were able to convince the American people that somehow Saddam Hussein was allied with the terrorists or whatever, right? And so therefore we should go in to the Middle East. And of course, as we look back now, absolute destabilization of the Middle East, which continues to this day, just absolutely reckless. But these people, they call themselves neocons, they were convinced of this, right? And there were no brakes on it at that time. I mean, the president wasn't going to be a brake, but for legitimate reasons, American people were just afraid, so it was easy to herd people in fear toward a particular objective, right? By 2007, when there was the economic downturn with the housing and all that, people realized what a disaster this whole thing was, and 2008 we had a change. But it's an interesting thing. All during the time, Cheney, who was deeply experienced, the absolute opposite of George W. Bush, right, had worked in various administrations, Secretary of Defense, and he had been advisors and everything, and really did know the government well and where all the buttons were. So he was an extraordinary guy. Now, famously, it'll say in here, he was called by his enemies or likened to Darth Vader, and it talks about in here how he just loved the term. He took it to himself. He liked the imagery, right, of being Darth Vader, and going through. And so he dies, but it says here, the most powerful vice president in American history. And that's, I guess, what we're going to get to, is like, the vice president, is he just like an afterthought, but then he becomes president and it changes things, or does it? So we'll have to look at that. I just wanted to start, and I'm going to the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to read some quotes from vice presidents about being vice president, and then I'm going to pass out a trivia contest to you. And you can have a partner, right? You're not gonna, these aren't gonna be graded or anything, and I'll pass them out. But just a few vice president's quotes, right? John Adams, who was the first vice president, really, he hated being vice president, right? He really hated being vice president. Somebody had to do it, and he got picked to do it. We're going to talk about ticket balancing. So Washington is from Virginia, and Adams is from Massachusetts, and so that's how they decide upon it. He writes to his wife, right, Abigail Adams, a wonderful woman. By the way, another time, if you heard me, I was advocating, if you can get a hold of it, the HBO series on John Adams, with Paul Giamatti playing him. There is, it's so good. And Laura Linney, who is actually my favorite actress, plays Abigail. There is a show going on right now on PBS. In fact, it'll be on tonight again, the third version of the American Revolution. And the voiceovers, Giamatti is also doing John Adams' voice in the voiceovers in the show. You don't see him, but you hear him, somebody speaking the words of John Adams. Anyway, he writes to Abigail that the vice presidency is the most insignificant office that was ever the invention of man contrived, or his imagination conceived. And then a second quote: "I am vice president. In this I am nothing, but I may be everything," which is, the okay. And the third one is, "This confinement will injure my health." That's a reference to the fact that, and I'm going to pass out something after the tribute, where the vice president is mentioned in the Constitution. But the first mention of the vice president in the Constitution is in Article 1. So originally the 1787 original Constitution, September 17th, 1787, only has 7 articles, right? It's fairly short, right? And of course, the complaints was, it has to be ratified by the states, and the states are making additional demands, and therefore, so it is ratified and goes into effect on March 4th, 1789, but it was under the condition that a Bill of Rights was added, and that happens 2 years later in 1791. So most people think of the original Constitution including the Bill of Rights, but they're actually sort of 2 separate things. But Article 1, which is the creation of the legislature, Article 2 is the executive branch, and Article 3 is the judicial branch. I'm really interested in this, and I've always said that reflected their intent. Their intent was that the primary powers of the government were going to come from the legislative branch, the people who made the laws, right? And they knew right away that there was going to be ties, because there's 2 senators from each state, so obviously ties could happen, and somebody said, well, how do we break the tie? And the vice president is named. This is in Article 1. Before they even get to the executive branch, they were talking, they didn't do like one thing and then do the next, they were doing the whole big picture. But I find that interesting that the vice president is in the Constitution before the president. It's before the word president appears, right? And Adams, who is totally snubbed by Washington and that cabinet, right? There is no such thing as the cabinet in the Constitution, right? It's an informal assembly of advisors that are named in the Constitution, but this kind of formal agreement that we'll get together monthly or weekly or something like that with all these cabinet positions, that's not in the Constitution. Yes?
I'm confused here because cabinet members have to be confirmed by the Senate. And it
Yeah.
does say that somewhere in the Constitution.
Yeah, what I'm saying is the cabinet is, oh, no. The advisors to the president that lead departments have to be confirmed by the Senate. So if you lead at that time, Henry Knox, the first Secretary of War, now it's back to war, until they changed it after World War II, made it Secretary of Defense, Henry Knox had to be confirmed. Right, but there's nothing about cabinet itself. Right, there's not, that term is not in
Well, no,
the
the
Constitution.
term is not
Right.
used, and obviously, over time, it's expanded.
Right, I'm just saying, it's an informal agreement. The the word cabinet actually comes from Jackson's time, and it was a reference to, literally, it's a visual image, you pull out this drawer if you wanted advice about defense, and this if you were doing treasury or something like that. But I'm just saying, the word cabinet is not there, right? And the vice president was never, so who's in the cabinet is invited by the president, right? Come on in, you can sit in this room. And
With the advice of the Senate.
Harding is the first president to invite the vice president, then Calvin Coolidge, to actually sit in on cabinet meetings. So the vice president has been basically pushed over to the side largely. So Adams is the first one to note this, but he is required constitutionally to sit in the Senate. Now, they don't do that anymore, but it seemed that was the obligation. So Adams would go and sit in the Senate every day as the, quote, president of the Senate, and he was there to cast tiebreakers. He did, by the way, cast 29 tiebreakers during his 8 years as vice president. I looked at him. I didn't know that one. Right. He did have a fairly significant effect once in, this is trivia stuff, but there was something called the Jay Treaty that was a big fight in the United States in 1794, right? Hamilton and his people had always advocated that, okay, now this is over, we should get along with the British because they are our biggest supply, they're our biggest trading partner.
Yeah.
So Hamilton, famously is pro-British. And so there's going to be a treaty. There's a treaty named after John Jay. Was the first, well, he was the first Supreme Court justice, but he was later something else. Anyway, John Jay is suggesting this treaty of like friendship with the British. Of course, there's a lot of, it's only 1794, a lot of anti-British feelings about this. And when it goes before the Congress, there is a tie. So Adams has to cast a tie-breaking vote, which he casts in favor of the Jay Treaty, right? Which hurts him really, really badly when he runs for president in 1800 against Thomas Jefferson. By that time, the British and French are fighting, and there's impressment of American sailors and all that sort of thing, and they said, well, you were supporting the British. And so anyway, just want to point that out. That was probably the most significant tie-breaking vote that he had. I've just got a couple more, and then I'll give the quiz. Daniel Webster, right? The mighty Daniel, I don't know, he's, read The Devil in Daniel Webster. He was a big guy in Massachusetts, right? Massachusetts hero kind of thing prior to the Civil War. Actually, that's another story. But anyway, he was a big hero, and he was offered the vice presidential nomination twice, right? He was Whig Party. That's the party that's opposed to Andrew Jackson. They called it, it's funny, like you look that up, there's the Democrats and the Whigs. Where did they come up with that name, right? William Henry Harrison's a Whig, Zachary Taylor's a Whig. Where did these guys come up with this name? And it was, they self-selected that. The Whig Party was the one that opposed, in Britain, was in opposition to the king. It was also a nickname there too, right? And so they come up with this party, which originally they called the National Republicans, but it's a party that exists in opposition to Jackson and to Jackson's followers, right? So that's where, and Webster is one of these Whigs, right? And the big issue was states' rights against sort of national vision. That's basically the fight between the two. So Webster is quoted as saying, "I do not propose to be buried before I'm dead." Right. It's really kind of ironical. I'm helping you with the trivia contest now, but Webster was twice offered the vice presidency, and in both cases, 1840 and in 1848, the president who offered him the vice president died in office. So either time, right, that he could have been president that way. But I don't know how. I have mixed feelings about Daniel Webster. He's not one of my big favorites. But anyway, so that's another one. Thomas Marshall. Thomas Marshall. He was Woodrow Wilson's vice president. It's really significant in the fact that you're probably aware that for the last 19 months of Wilson's presidency, he was elected 2 terms, he had suffered a major stroke and was essentially incapacitated. And so we don't have till 1967 that amendment. We don't have any, we'll look at these, any formal way to remove a disabled president, unless the disabled president agrees to be removed, right? So Marshall, who is the vice president, he is a senator from Indiana. Marshall is nothing. He does basically nothing. He's not invited even to the White House. And he was picked 2 times, right? And Marshall, one thing, we're all old enough, you might have heard this phrase, what this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar. You've heard that?
Oh, yeah.
That's Thomas Marshall, right? Marshall, I was Wilson's spare tire, only, this is my own handwriting, only used in an emergency, although it's ironic when the emergency came, he wasn't used. Then a famous story that I have misattributed at least once here. I always thought John Adams said this. But this is, I looked this up in several places to make sure I had this, well, who knows, but I think I have this right. He said, once, this is the story, a woman had 2 sons. One went off to sea, the other became vice president. Neither one was ever heard from again, right? I thought John Adams said that. And when you look at it, it's like funny. And John Adams was never known for being funny. And I thought, John Adams told a joke? But anyway, turns out that wasn't him. And he said that 5-cent cigar. And lastly, John Nance Garner, right? John Nance Garner. Anybody?
Yeah.
FDR's first vice president, the first 2 terms. Cactus Jack Garner. I don't know if my wife remembers this. One time we took a trip, this is in 2003, so it's many years ago. We took a trip from San Antonio out to Big Bend National Park. It's way out on the Mexican border, way out in Texas, 400 miles from San Antonio to Big Bend, right? So we drove out there, we stayed one night over and came back. On the way back, we're driving and she can tell you, if I see a historical marker on the sign, I want to pull over. And we're in Uvalde, Texas, which is now famous for the school shooting. But there's a sign that says, pull over and 6 houses down the road, you can see the grave of John Nance Garner. So of course we pulled over to see the grave of John Nance Garner. And so I have been in Uvalde, but it has a different connotation now. John Nance Garner was asked to be vice president by Franklin Roosevelt. Right? John Nance Garner is from Texas. This is a perfect example of regional ticket balancing. FDR from New York, John Nance Garner from Texas. FDR, he had pioneered some of his New Deal programs while being governor of New York, so what we would call as a liberal. And John Nance Garner is a Southern, just a cranky old guy kind of thing, and it's clear that, he's a conservative, right? As much as you could be for this. Now, this is before the New Deal. This is before the government starts pumping money into Texas, rural electrification and stuff. Anyway, they're just picking a guy, right, to do this. He agreed somewhat reluctantly, right? And it's interesting, well, I don't want to tell you this because it's one of the trivia questions, right? But in 1960, he is asked by Lyndon Johnson for advice about should I take this as vice president, right? And John Nance Garner is still alive. This is sort of amazed me. He was still alive in 1960 to give this famous piece of advice, and the last word has been debated over, but he told Johnson that it wasn't worth a pitcher of warm spit, piss, or the S word there that many people have to. He's a really salty character, so it could be that anyway. And so he was known for saying that. I just found that fascinating. Some of these guys live a really long, well, I think they turn out to be actually not that old. But I remember Harry Truman, when I was a kid, I thought this guy's really, really old. In 1965, when Medicare for the first time came into existence, Johnson, who was the president at the time, gave the first 2 Medicare cards to Harry and Bess Truman, right? They were the first ones to get it. It was a ceremony in the White House. They were still around, and I was a politics junkie from when I was a little kid. I was a sophomore in high school, I watched remember when they used to show the whole conventions on TV? Gavel to gavel for 4 days, right? And I was in high school and I'm watching this. Herbert Hoover shows up at the Republican convention and gives a speech endorsing Barry Goldwater. And I'm thinking, how could he still be alive? Because I was 16, How can anybody still be alive in 64? Whatever he was. But that's the last thing I want to say about that. Okay, here we go. Here are the trivia contests. And as I said, work on it with a partner. The Dick Cheney thing you can bring home and read on your own. Okay, you can go for 3. It doesn't really matter. Oh, here. Could you go with the lady in the back? Okay. Who do you make? All right. Something to do. Something to talk about with your friends. Here, have another one. Okay. Yeah, you don't have to do it with a partner. You can do it yourself. I can give you another one. I got 20. You want one? Yep. You want a pen?
We have a pen.
Oh, okay.
This woman brought one. So,
Do you want one separately? Oh, okay. I was wondering what that was.
I can't get it.
All right, I'll get that.
Oh, I thought that was you guys anyhow.
Brakes on the...
Someone will have to help me get it because I can't pay for it.
Okay.
My master's.
We don't know yet.
How are you?
Oh, and then.
Thank you for your help. Great to see you.
Was it Nixon, Eisenhower was vice president?
Both terms.
Then, oh, okay, yeah, you got 1964.
By the way, when you get to the end on the last page, this may surprise you. It says, who is your favorite vice president and why? We'll do that toward the end. Right? In case you have one.
You have a favorite person?
Cool. This is why I didn't bring your pen, because it fits me with two hands.
No. Do you want a pen? I got pens. They're not my pens. See if it works.
He's not gonna give me any answers. What's the question?
Three of them went.
Well, you tell us who they are.
No, go over. I'm going to the men's room.
I know good.
I'll be back.
What did you win it for? What did you do?
Climate change.
I never paid any attention to that. Now, what year was that? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it had to do with climate.
Who was Clinton's vice president?
Al Gore. Oh, wait a minute, Clinton? Yeah, Al Gore.
I remember when they came to vote. I saw it.
Oh, yeah.
I saw that. I saw it. Was it divorced? Wait, did they get divorced?
No. maybe you're thinking of, what do you call it, John, one of the grants president,
It was during the Clinton election.
oh,
It was Gore that was his vice president, it was White.
I don't think we'll get.
Who can't think of
John,
the names?
yeah,
That would have been active for one. That would have
One of them, John Edwards.
John Edwards, yeah.
The guy
He ran for president.
It was typical, yes, it was. I saw her before this. No,
I can't picture it right now.
I can't either.
I'm not familiar with work.
I graduated from Lowry and Sud. I realized it was really done this.
And was that during his
Mixed in
time?
1960. Then he get back to 63.
I got married in '60. And he got elected.
So maybe 15 minutes at most, because this isn't the whole show. And, you know, it's like 60s rock
Oh, let's see,
band. You don't remember them all.
I've been to Carmel and what's his name?
We don't know any of the answers.
Really?
Eighteen seventy-five.
No, you don't have to know the date. You have to know the name. Okay.
I did a pay raise. Yeah, they get a pay raise.
Yeah. The police did that too.
Yeah.
All the police went
The
over.
Quinn Act.
Yeah, I know.
The one that. They did it online.
Jack Hill?
Jack Hill?
I was in the house.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
You're not going to get it. It's
I,
really curious question.
yeah, I worked on days.
Oh, wow. For you. I don't think I'll make it to that. I've only had one out of that. I don't think I'll make it to that.
It's my first time here, so I'm having fun.
No.
My first time.
It doesn't matter. I'm going to cut this off and give the answers very
Yeah, 'cause we don't know what.
Yeah. I'm just curious. People
Oh, you don't
might
know
want
anything.
to do this.
That's why we're here.
I know the right answers. Who was my
Yeah,
favorite?
I can get it.
Who was the biggest fan?
You know what, I have a question. At the beginning of your discussion, you said that in the Constitution, the Vice President was mentioned as President of the Senate, so we could break the tie.
Yeah.
So he was mentioned before the Senate.
Before the president.
Wasn't in the executive.
That, to me, is very significant that shows you that they gave they gave the value of the legislature and the vice president, they gave it more.
Right. The vice president tiebreaker was simply a practical move. They had to decide if there is who's going to do it. Right? They knew they were going to have a vice president. I'm just saying, but what I was saying at the beginning was right. They did believe the legislative branch was the most important branch of government. That's why they put it first. Yeah.
James certainly knows about the Lisa King was.
So it is, the last name is Johnson.
Yeah, we know the first name. Andrew Jackson.
Jackson, there is a president.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes.
Well, I'm gonna read it.
I was gonna say that it would be, what do you call it, Dr. Eda.
What's going on?
Dan Quayle. He couldn't spell potato.
Dan Quayle?
Yeah.
Close.
Wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. He was like third or fourth. I don't think you've ever heard of him. Would be my guess. I wrote this out in bigger print. I only saw this yesterday, and I went into school, and I ran them off last night.
Call me when you come, I can do all my pictures.
All right, so we can break the suspense and go into it. Just looking at the names, whether you've heard of them or not, allows us to talk about them. I'm going to give you information packets, which is something that you probably would like. Right? No, these are just yeah, the information packet. There you go.
Great, thank you.
I didn't want to give you these because they would have helped you get the right answers.
That's good, we need it.
These are not the right answers, it's just that they could help you with the right answers. Okay, let's see. Oh,
Oh, there you go. Board was with Walton on. Oh, for the elections, okay.
You can put the question which vice president was wrong on 2028.
That'll be a disaster. Okay. So, it's one of the ones, just about the trivia. I was thinking of these as I was going along, and one that I realized that I could have put in, that I didn't, and I somehow realized this last night. Only 4 vice presidents, sitting vice presidents, were directly elected to the presidency, right? It's not a stepping stone to the presidency. The one that you might get was the last one was George Herbert Walker Bush, was elected right after Reagan's 2 terms, right? In the normal course of affairs, after 8 years of one-party ruling, the alternative party is put in, right? So after 4 years of George W. Bush, 8 years of George W. Bush, we get 8 years of Obama, right? But then people are tired of the Democrats, so they put in Trump, sorry. Sorry, I was blocking that out. Anyway, in this case, now there are little idiosyncrasies. The Democratic candidate in 1988 was a man that I really love and voted for a number of times. Was Mike Dukakis. Was a horrible, just a bad choice to be the president, because in '88 there was a sense of optimism. The Cold War was about to end. The real tensions with the Soviets had ended. The earlier problems in the first economic problems in the first term of the Reagan administration had largely been either overcome or elided, like people forgot about them, and inequalities and stuff like that. And so there was like George Herbert Walker Bush, who had many accomplishments. And so, he got there. He's the last answer. The other ones here are Martin Van Buren, who succeeds Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, who succeeds John Adams, and John Adams, who succeeds George Washington. Right? So, we're not. It's
No,
not on
that
there.
was-
I'm just saying I forgot to put that one up there, which is a pretty cool one, because it shows you that it's such a rare occasion that they get passed on like that. All right. So, answers. There's been 45 presidents, 2 of them repeated, so that's why they say Bush is 47, but Cleveland and not Bush, I'm saying that. Trump is 47, and Grover Cleveland, right? They're the only 2 that had non-consecutive terms, right? How many vice presidents have there been? Well, is it more or less? It has to be more, right? It has to be more. So the answer is 50. 50 men have been vice president, 45 men have been president. Yes?
And 1 woman? No, there's been a vice president.
Oh, I'm sorry. 49 men and 1 woman, that's a mistake on my part. Right, okay. 15 vice presidents, what?
What woman is the vice president?
Harris.
Kamala Harris. Yeah, no, I know. I know. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about ticket balancing, and that one's fairly obvious. Okay. 8 succeeded after a presidential death. So the first president to die in office is William Henry Harrison in 1841. He is the man who is president for the shortest amount of time. He, at least the story is. Now remember, they used to get inaugurated on March 4th until 1937, right? And then they moved it up to January. But anyway, so Harrison gives a long speech in the pouring rain outside. He was elected because he was a famous general. There are other ones here. And he was showing his vigor, I guess. He was maybe 60, I mean, he wasn't ancient kind of thing. And he dies. He gets a pneumonia and dies. And John Tyler is his vice president. Again, who knows about John Tyler, right? But it's a weird sort of thing, because Harrison is the first Whig president, right? So it's a new party, but they don't really, they believe in national expansion and making roads and bridges and the Erie Canal and this kind of stuff like that, which takes tax money. So the other side is saying, no, everything should be done locally. With the Jackson's party, he's not running against Jackson. But they're hedging their bets. So they pick a guy from Virginia, John Tyler, who's actually a Democrat, to run with Harrison, thinking, the vice president is nothing. you know, he sent him over in the Senate, maybe once in a while he shows up, and not even thinking about it. Then Harrison goes and dies, right? Tyler, who is opposed to every program of William Henry Harrison, is now, and of the whole Whig Party, is now the president. And it really makes a big difference in American history. It's obscured now because it was the 1840s, but it made a real difference. And it was really kind of a stunner. Tyler, yeah. And there was a big discussion at the time about how, is he really president or is he acting president, right? Because it hadn't happened before. So his opponents are saying, well, he's really only the acting president, whatever that meant. It wouldn't have made any difference in reality. Tyler does nothing during his 4 years, and it's almost 4 years as president, except for veto pieces of legislation that are coming out of Congress that is run by, at that time, there's a reaction to Jackson, and run by the Whigs. He vetoes every piece of legislation. He has the record for the number of vetoes.
Who's that?
John Tyler, right? Again, you know, have you heard of him? John Tyler is interesting. Other little trivia things. Which vice president had the most children? It's John Tyler with 2 wives. He had 16 children.
Why?
Which vice president of the United States was later in the Confederate Congress? John Tyler. Okay, so, like, if you're, you know, on Jeopardy. Okay. 1850, Millard Fillmore, who, all right. He was the vice president for, yes, right, Zachary Taylor, right? Zachary Taylor, big Mexican War hero, was from Kentucky. He's buried in Kentucky, but at the time he lived in Louisiana, so you see that he'll be listed as that. Millard Fillmore was from New York, a congressman, and this is another split, Louisiana and Texas, right? Taylor dies of, it was controversial. In a really hot afternoon, barbecue or whatever they called it at that time, he's swigging down cold milk, whatever we call unpasteurized milk, of course, at the time, and eating raw cherries, and he gets gastroenteritis and dies, right? Pretty quickly. Like, he doesn't hang out for a long time like this. Terrible, I mean, it was really controversial amongst historians for decades and decades and decades. He was finally interred. They dug up his body in the 1950s because for all that time, there was a belief that he had been poisoned. And that the 2 possible villains were pro-slavery Southerners because Taylor, even though he was a Southern slaveholder, had signed the Compromise of 1850, which brought California into the Union as a free state. And so there were vicious feelings that he had betrayed them. The other accusation was the Catholics, who were the boogeymen of the time, right? You know, stories about people burning down convents in Boston and that sort of thing. So the Catholics, they were like, you know, the bad, so they were like, I don't know, Muslim terrorists or something at the time. All right, Millard Fillmore, he doesn't run again, doesn't even try to run again. Andrew Johnson is, of course, Lincoln's vice president, you know, amongst the vice presidents who are most known. Another strange case. It's Lincoln's second term. So Lincoln's, this be real deep in the woods. Who was Lincoln's first vice president? Hey. Okay, well that one's like the bonus question on Jeopardy or whatever. Right, it's Hannibal Hamlin. Hannibal Hamlin, the governor of Maine. Hannibal Hamlin, the governor of Maine, was his first vice president. Now that was, Lincoln is from what they call the West, Illinois, and this is from the Northeast, right? And there you go. Hannibal Hamlin was a good Republican. He was abolitionist. He was, you know, all the kind of things that you want, and apparently a good governor. But in the second term, in 1864, why does he dump Hannibal Hamlin, perfectly serviceable? Would have been, and I think about this, I mean, more than you would think, oh, is this guy thinking about this? If he had kept Hannibal Hamlin as his VP, the history of the United States would have been utterly different. But he picks Andrew Johnson. It seems inconceivable, right? Now, Lincoln, particularly if you've gone to Washington, D.C., right, and visited the monuments, right? The most extraordinary monument is, most worshipful monument, is the Lincoln Memorial, right? I mean, Washington's doesn't even have his name on it. It's just a spire. You know, Jefferson's tucked away around in the back, but his is like a Roman Greek temple, right? Well, right. No, but the massive worshipfulness. And I can talk about it. It's another whole lecture why they made that kind of thing at that time. There's a reason. They went overboard purposefully on that, right? It was supposed to be a symbol of the final reconciliation of the North and the South. So this kind of thing. And there were veterans from both armies still alive that came, huge kind of thing like that. But you look at that and you think, how could Lincoln be worried about re-election in 1864? The Battle of Gettysburg had been fought, and you think, oh, he must have been. He must have been so popular. How's he going to lose? So he picks Andrew Johnson, who's a Democrat, right? You all know, yeah, Lincoln's a Republican. Is a Democrat from Tennessee. Now, why does he pick him? Johnson was the only Southern senator that did not leave the Union. All the rest of the Southern senators were all Democrats. They walked out of the Senate and denounced the United States. Johnson stayed. Right? Johnson's from, there's a sort of a school in, if you, Civil War, south of the, he represented poor people. And there are stories that he couldn't read and all this sort of thing. And he had been a tailor, literally. That was his profession. Not the fancy lawyers or whatever. Even Lincoln was a lawyer, even though you don't see him as a fancy boy. But so Johnson's here and he's going to represent the Democrats, right? And going to be the people who are sort of suspicious of Lincoln. Johnson is, and you can read this anywhere, a fearsome racist, right? Just in, I mean, so Lincoln dies, and the project to free the slaves is going to have to be implemented, right? And so we do get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, 65, 68, and 70, but it has to be enforced, right? Protection of the slaves, I mean, all like this. And Johnson's nothing. He vetoes every piece of legend. They attempt to impeach him. The Republicans.
Did they do this about him when you picked him?
Lincoln. Yeah.
He didn't think he was gonna die.
Yeah, he didn't think he was going to die, but to get the votes, if you ever watch, I mean, there's the Daniel Day-Lewis movie where he plays Lincoln. And there's a scene in there where, okay, so Lincoln's reelected, and the Civil War ends in April, and the Emancipation Proclamations has already been, you know, and we know that the slaves are going to be freed if there's a constitutional amendment freeing them, right? So Lincoln dies in April. When does the constitutional amendment pass? The whole war's been fought to free the slaves. It passes in December of 1865, right? The war's been over, Lincoln's been dead, and they still can't. There are no Southern congressmen in the Congress in Washington, right? And it still can't pass freedom of slaves, right? So this idea, I mean, you have to, like, when you think about history, you got to be thinking about the way it actually was at the moment, right? This isn't a shoo-in, right? You have Juneteenth all the time, and it's celebrated. I'm not opposing this at all, but that represents the end of slavery, and it's not true. There were still legal slaves in Delaware and Kentucky until there were 10,000 slaves still in Kentucky. No, in Texas was when Granger, the general, got to Texas and told the slaves they were free.
Yeah.
That was in June of '65, but it wasn't illegal. That was an executive action, and some generals who were abolitionists freed slaves. Right? Other generals weren't all that interested in it, but if the general was choosing to do that, he could, as an executive, on the basis of an executive order given by the dead Lincoln, to free the slaves, right, in the area, but not legally. So this is really complicated, but it's interesting. One of the things that just drives me up the wall. On December 5th, 1865, 13th Amendment frees the slaves. December 20th, 1865, 15 days later, Andrew Johnson pardons all of the Confederates who were in rebellion against the government, right? Jefferson Davis was held for about 3 months. That was it. Other people were, for a short time, deprived of their ability to go into the Congress of the United States. But by 1870, these people are heroes. Robert E. Lee is back to being a big hero. President of Lee University in Virginia, now it's Washington and Lee, right? And, no, Washington University, now it's Washington and Lee. They're all restored their reputations almost immediately, within a very short period of time. It is extraordinary. Now, it would have taken a president like Lincoln being there, it wouldn't have played out quite like that. Right? Lincoln wasn't God, he couldn't have fixed all the race relations, but it would have headed in a different direction. So I just want to mention that. Chet Arthur, right? Chester A. Arthur of New York, right? There is, if you have Netflix, I don't know if any of you do, we have Netflix, right? There is right now being played on Netflix a 4-part series historical series called Death by Lightning. That's the name of it, okay? And it's about the assassination of James Garfield. And if you get National Geographic, the newest one that's coming out, will have an article about the assassination and the later implications of an unknown president, they're saying. Who knows about James Garfield, all right? This show, okay, so I'm a junkie on this, but this show is good, amazingly good. The actors, you'll recognize them, and but they're historical. If you taught this for years, you knew these guys. James Blaine and James G. Blaine. He's played by Bradley Whitford, the guy that was in West Wing. Yeah. But he's got all the beard and everything, and I'm thinking, who's the guy? But anyway, they're all played by actors that you would recognize even if you can't pull their name up immediately. It's 4 parts. They're like 55 minutes apiece or something. And there's Blaine, and there's Chet Arthur, and there's Garfield, and there's all these characters from the time, and it's so good. And it's funny how you wonder, somebody read a book who is the producer for Netflix, and if you're want to read a book, there's a book called Destiny of the Republic. Candace Millard, Millard, Destiny of the Republic. And, you know, people say, well, I don't read any history. Do you have a book I could read? This one I would hand them. Next month, if you come to the Great Depression, I have some other suggestions. But if you're going to hand somebody a book that doesn't like read history, you want to hand them something that's a page turner. This is the most wonderful book. And this series is based on the book. The book's 6 years old at least. Somebody gave it to me when I retired from teaching in 2019. So it's at least settled. There's a hardback she gave me. It's just the most wonderful book. And somebody read it and they made this thing. So I'm just saying here, but yes.
Arthur is a very interesting case. He was a product of the machine spoil system in New York
Yeah.
and the Institute of the Modern Civil Service.
That's right. And this is brought up. So Chet Arthur isn't even like an elected official. He is running the Port of New York. And it's just, remember, before the constitutional amendment that allows the federal income tax, the government is getting most of their money, the federal government is getting most of their money from tariffs. So if you control a big port and the money that's coming in and out, the opportunity for graft, for payoffs and all this. So the port is actually run by a senator from New York, Roscoe Conkling, who's like a big, just like a gigantic corrupt figure, right? And anyway, if you watch it, you can see there's sort of a hung convention. They pick Garfield, who's like a reformer, but they can't let him get away with that, so they put this really, Chet Arthur, this guy who's known for being corrupt, as his vice president. And as this man points out, Arthur came to really admire Garfield. And when Garfield dies, he wants to carry out his work. And so the civil service reform test that we have originates with Chet Arthur, because it was all patronage positions before that, irrespective if you had any skills whatsoever that had to do with that job. All right. Next one is Teddy Roosevelt, which you all know. William McKinley is killed in Buffalo at the Buffalo World's Fair, and Teddy Roosevelt takes over. There is a house in Buffalo that you can visit, which is the Teddy Roosevelt inauguration site. The site of where the actual assassination took place, I was on a teacher's week-long tour of Buffalo and this kind of stuff, so this is why I know this inside joke. But anyway, you know, we're saying, where's the site of the assassination? And there's, the whole area was cleared out, and it's big Tony houses. And they said that the Buffalo Sabres players usually live in this neighborhood. And there's like a boulevard in the middle, you know, like a grassy strip in the middle of a highway, not highway, but residential neighborhood, you know, like in the middle of Com Ave or whatever. And there's a rock with a plaque on it. In this spot, William McKinley was assassinated. Right, that's it. That was the whole thing. Anyway, Teddy Roosevelt comes, right? Now, this is a gigantic change in policy. This is another case where it really flips. McKinley was much admired by, Trump really doesn't know much of anything, but he was told that McKinley was big on, you know, expanding and all this sort of thing. Trump said, oh, McKinley, he was taking foreign territories. Under McKinley, we got Philippines and Cuba, Puerto Rico, you know, Guam, Samoa, and this sort of thing. So Trump, of course, then changed Denali, according to him and his friends, back to Mount McKinley in Alaska, right, because of that, right? So he's an expansionist president. Also, the old conservative Republican, where president, you know, it was a philosophy that if the wealthy people do well, that it'll redound to the benefit of the poor people. We'll get to Hoover. During Hoover's time, it was, you know, the trickle-down theory,
Yeah.
right? The crumbs fall off the table, or with Reagan, that sort of thing. McKinley was one of those guys, right? They called him Dollar Bill McKinley. Big tariffs, high tariffs, right? Why does he pick Teddy Roosevelt? This seems really odd. Teddy Roosevelt is a noisy, very noisy man. If you go, again, you know, my wife and I went Sagamore Hill in Long Island. It's on the western end of Long Island. It's done hard to get to if you're in New York. And that's his home, right? And it's a wonderful tour. But he's like an extraordinary man. And he has flaws too that I could talk about, but we don't have no time. But he is governor of New York, and the New York machine, right, that sort of the corrupt politicians who were running in Albany, want to get him out of New York. So they suggest to the Republican Party that make him vice president. And he'll disappear, and we can run New York in a corrupt fashion. That's actually what happened. So they take him here, but McKinley is killed 9 months into his second term. So Teddy Roosevelt's his second vice president. Okay, Calvin Coolidge, keep cool with Cal. This is Harding is on a train trip around the country. He was up in Alaska, and he's coming down the West Coast. He's taking like a magnificent train trip, and he dies in San Francisco. I can't tell you exactly of what, right? And Calvin Coolidge comes in here, right? Harding and Coolidge, Ohio and Massachusetts, right? Coolidge was a favorite of the conservatives because Harding was the conservatives. Coolidge was most famous at that time for one thing, which was what?
The police strike.
Breaking the police strike, right? The police went on strike in Boston, and Coolidge was the governor, and Coolidge wasn't going to let these labor unions get away with it. And if you read about it, it was amazing. They had like little self-made militia groups of distinguished citizens, like Harvard students, got dressed up in little uniforms, were doing billy clubs, and went down and policed the Boston Common and stuff like this. It was a real ugly thing, but Coolidge is known around the country as a strikebreaker, right? And so he's a good pick there, right? Silent Cow. Right, you know that, just a little story. There's a story. Two women are at a cocktail party where Coolidge is, and they make a bet, and a woman walks up to Coolidge and says, "I bet my friend that I can get you to say more than 2 words." And Coolidge says,
You lose.
"You lose." It's another place to visit is the Coolidge Homestead in Plymouth, Vermont, right? Again, my wife and I were coming back from Montreal, and I saw a sign on the road, and we went in, and we thought we were going to just drop in for just a short time, and we spent a couple of hours there. It was fabulous, just fabulous. They rebuilt it exactly the way it was at the time. Coolidge was there when he heard on a telephone. They had a telephone even in 1923 there. He was at his father's house in Plymouth, Vermont, where he grew up, and he got the phone call that the president had died. His father was a justice of the peace, and it was actually his father that swore him in as president of the United States, right there in Plymouth. So so they have it completely rebuilt, exactly the whole farm as it would have appeared in 1923 at the time. Like the phone is the same time there. It is just a cool take, you know. Anyway, just to mention that. Harry Truman, of course, everybody knows about that one, right? Harry Truman. Harry Truman is Roosevelt's 3rd vice president. Roosevelt was president for 4 terms, or elected 4 times, would have been 4 terms. And so he has 3 vice presidents. John Nance Garner for the first 2. But we're going to do maybe the New Deal next time. The first, you always think of Roosevelt's administration for the first term where all those programs are passed, right? And he runs in 36 against Al Fland, and he just slaughters him. Who's going to run Roosevelt? And his campaign manager, Jim Farlow, says, nobody votes against Santa Claus. Right? But by the second term of Roosevelt is not sunny times, right? The country's starting to get back on his feet, and so his opponents feel emboldened to battle on him on tooth and nail on every single piece of legislation he goes through. He does get stuff through. I'm going to pass out next week like a list with the years of the various programs to get through, but he has to fight so badly. And Garner is opposing him or not supporting him with Southerners. There's a fear that Roosevelt is more and more under the influence of his wife, looking with favor upon colored people and seeing them as deserving of equal treatment in these government, public-sponsored government programs, right? So, we can talk about that when it happens. So he dumps John Nance Garner, right? So now it's 1940. We know the war is coming. He knows the war is coming. Roosevelt, my favorite guy, had there not been a war, probably would have given it up. He was ill his entire presidency. He probably wouldn't have run again. But he knows, and I don't know anybody disagrees, that he's the person who should be the president as we approach this war, right? He picks as his vice president Henry Wallace. Not even Henry Wallace. You knew that one. Yeah. Henry Wallace, not even a Democrat. Henry Wallace is a Republican, a progressive Republican. Henry Wallace, and he had been Secretary of Agriculture. He was from Iowa. He got fairly famous later because he's one of the people who ran against Truman in '48. But he's there. So he's there for the first 4 years of the war. But now the war is coming to an end by the time of the election in 1944, and now the issue is going to be foreign policy. Wallace is considered to be too close to the communists. Whatever, communists were anybody who believed in, passing out the sugar to widely amongst the population. But he's an advocate for social programs that are associated with being a communist, right? I love this kind of thing. Just a little aside thing. I'm holding signs at Kennedy School in the last dismal election that we just had, on the morning of the election, about 8 o'clock, and I'm holding a sign for a school committee member that I was for that didn't win, and I'm standing next to my current city councilor, right? And there's a bunch of us there, and we're all talking, and I said, oh, first time I ever voted was in 1969, because you had to be 21 in those days. And I cast my first vote for a Republican in New York, John Lindsay. Right? John Lindsay. And so, I just want to say, you might have heard the statistic. Mondani got, 50 point tiny bit, but the sheer number of votes, right? The last time that anybody got more votes for mayor of New York was Lindsay in 1969 with, I don't know, probably not fewer people. There were probably at least as many people then. John Lindsay, progressive Republican, right? So this guy hears this and he says, oh, you're from New York? And I said, oh, yeah, I'm happily from New York. He said, well, if you lived in New York, who would you vote for? And I said, oh, yeah, I'd vote for Mondani.
Yeah.
And he got all upset. I mean, literally got upset and starts going on about the socialists,
Oh, God.
right? And it was just extraordinary. I mean, it was just like, he just like fumed over, I didn't even have the opportunity to vote for Mondani. I was voting for Matt Stanton. I'm holding his sign. And it was a stunner. I mean, yeah, anyway, it was just a funny little thing that happened there. So Harry Truman with Roosevelt. Truman is a machine politician from Missouri. The old bit about the failed haberdasheries and all this sort of thing. Truman had got some notice, public notice, because he ran an investigation into military overspending, the contractors, so that he got some fame in the newspapers and stuff. He was seen as like, the common man, right? And so Roosevelt, this is a kind of a funny thing, like Roosevelt picked him. Roosevelt had to know he was dying. Although we know, like with Biden, he had to know that he was losing it. I don't know what his thoughts were. He didn't have anybody. Roosevelt at that point was pretty much alone. Amongst some of his older advisors were gone and stuff. And he was just convinced, it was like an afterthought, why don't you pick this guy, you can get votes. Roosevelt wasn't going to lose, and they picked Truman, and then Truman becomes president. In terms of changing policy, Truman really didn't. Truman turned out to be a pretty good president, but it's kind of accidental. It's said that they only met once. Yeah, Truman, and that Truman, as vice president, was not invited into any of these meetings about the Manhattan Project. So Truman doesn't know that the bomb is being made in New Mexico until after he's president, right? And he's the vice president. So, Truman's life is very, very interesting, but don't have time there. And he could legitimately be your favorite vice president. Then there's LBJ, right? LBJ. And LBJ really chafes in the office. LBJ was the Senate Majority Leader. LBJ ran whatever came out of the Senate piece of legislation. And so he is stepping backwards, right? When he takes this. And he takes it with great reluctance. Bobby Kennedy and him hated each other, but John Kennedy, to his credit, wants to make LBJ feel like he's useful, and he gives him lots of tasks. He runs NASA, down at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Oh, that's another tape. God, what a fabulous place. The thing that impressed me most, the astronauts, for weightlessness, how do they practice that? They go in, I love pools, this giant pool, and then down in, it's an amazing place, the Johnson Space Center. The place in Huntsville is pretty good, but I thought the Johnson Space Center, which is more like really actively training astronauts, is a good place to go. Yeah.
What is the place in Huntsville?
Space Camp used to be there. It's the headquarters now. They're moving more and more of the NASA apparatus to Huntsville. The actual offices and stuff, right? But there's also a museum kind of thing. And back in the day, in the 70s, remember there was a television show, Space Camp? And that's the actual place. I had a friend who lived in Nashville, and we drove up to see Space Camp from Nashville. It's not that far. No, down to see Space Camp once. It wasn't fabulous, but the Johnson Space Center is. Later elected in their own right, Teddy Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson. Did not succeed after the presidential death, but were also later elected in their own rights. John Adams, Jefferson, you know, Van Buren, you can read these here. Richard Nixon, right? Richard Nixon is Eisenhower's vice president for 2 terms. He runs in 60, loses to Kennedy, comes back and runs in 68 and wins. So that's what this sort of thing is. Jerry Ford is the only one that became president on resignation. H.W. Bush. Yeah, and Joe Biden, right, later elected in their own right. Have been vice president to more than one president. This is trivia. Okay, George Clinton, who was senator from New York, is vice president to, wait a minute, Jefferson and Madison. Right, John C. Calhoun is vice president to John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. He resigns the vice presidency there. He and Spiro Agnew are the only two.
Who was the first one?
Sorry.
Not Agnew, but the other one.
Oh, John C. Calhoun.
Why did he resign?
He and Jackson picked him for votes, right? And but he opposed Jackson on every single issue. Particularly, the biggest issue that they fought about was the tariff, right? Jackson was a high tariff guy, and Calhoun thought that tariff was stealing from people. He resigns, he goes back, and he becomes a senator from South Carolina and is famous for many pro-slavery speeches in front of the Senate. George Clinton, I just want to say, not the guy from Funkadelphia, but he had a brother who's more famous, DeWitt Clinton. What is DeWitt Clinton famous for? He's the governor of New York. I got a mule, her name is Sal. 16 miles on the Erie Canal. So when DeWitt Clinton was governor, they built the Erie Canal, which was like, I don't know if you ever went on, I was on a teacher's program in Rochester, and we went out on a boat ride. It's just like recreational boat ride place now, the Erie Canal. It was started in Buffalo and went to Albany, and the idea was that all of the agricultural goods out of the Midwest would land in Buffalo and then be taken by barges down to Albany, where they could be put back on ships and go down and then exit via New York into the Atlantic. It's just an interesting thing. But you can go there and it's full of recreational boats. It's like, you know, Hingham Harbor or something. And but you can, you know, do these little ferry rides. It's very cool. Yeah. But the mules actually pulled the canals through. I mean, the boats through the canals. Very cool. But when the railroads came about, by the 1840s, it just becomes obscure. I mean, it's nothing. Now it's just kind of a thing that you could only use for recreation. Yeah, okay, so, yes, Calhoun and Agnew. These guys die in office. I'm not going to take the time to talk about them much. Things that you might know, Elbridge Gerry was the vice president. He vice president since 1814, so he's the vice president of James Madison. This is Elbridge Gerry from gerrymandering. Right? He was the governor of Massachusetts when this first case of gerrymandering that we're very familiar with now was being approved. So he could get more of his guys elected, right? And then the new map, the story is the new map was published in, I don't know, Salem Evening News or something like this, and a newspaper man saw the picture of the map. and it went all over the place, right? And he said, oh, this looks like a salamander. This new district is shaped like a salamander, and it came to get the name gerrymander, the oddly shaped ones in order to achieve political goals. So that's Elbridge Gerry. William Rufus King, which would never get in 1,000 years, but he was the vice president of, I'm losing this now, sorry. Yeah, Franklin Pierce, thank you. Sorry, 1852, I'm thinking, who's that? Yeah, Franklin Pierce, right? Pierce was from New Hampshire and King was from Alabama, so you can see that. King never spent a day as vice president in the United States. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, if you stayed till 5, I could still be going, everybody would be leaving. But let me just say this, he was never vice president in the United States. When the inauguration came, he was sick and he was actually in Cuba and recovering. They sent a federal judge down to swear him in. He never came back alive to the United States, William Rufus King. Henry Wilson, vice president, in those days they had nicknames. He was from Massachusetts. His nickname was the native blacksmith. And I'm not going to go on with the rest of these here. By the way, if you do watch that Death by Lightning, this last one, number 7, James S. Sherman, the brother of William Tecumseh Sherman, who was a senator from Ohio and became Secretary of the Treasury and all this sort of thing. He is in the film, right? He's in the film. He's a major character in the film, James Sherman. Fewer than 100 days, John Tyler, you can see there, Andrew Johnson, William Rufus King, Harry Truman. 3 men been vice president, also won the Nobel Peace Prize, right? So you're aware of Teddy Roosevelt ending the Russo-Japanese War, 1905, right? And he gets it in 1906, but the war ended in 1905. Al Gore for the climate change with a group of scientists, right? 2007. Charles Dawes. If you were in my AP Gov class, history class, you would know Charles Dawes. In fact, back when we were in high school, they talked about the Dawes Act, the Dawes Plan. In the 1920s, right, the World War I ends, but the Germans are being charged reparations by the countries that they beat up on, Belgium, France, Britain, they're being charged reparations. They have no money, none. So, and it's going to break out in another war. Dawes comes up with a plan to have Americans lend money to the Germans to restore their economy, rebuild their economy like we did at the end of World War II, and also pay back the reparations. It was actually a really good plan that was working until the crash. And so this, this really did bring peace, or the end of fearsome enmity. So it was a good thing. All right, let's see, we're getting near the end. 3 vice presidents that have had the same last name. Andrew Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, and you're not going to get that, Richard Johnson, right? Richard Mentor Johnson. By the way, I have given you all these lists and charts and everything in here. You could look these up. Johnson was from Kentucky. Another bit of trivia. If you know that if a president doesn't get a majority of the electoral votes, the decision is made in the House of Representatives. What if the vice president doesn't get a majority of the electoral votes? All right? Where is that decided? It's decided in the Senate. This has only happened one time in American history, right? Richard Mentor Johnson, a congressman from Kentucky, is the vice presidential pick of Martin Van Buren, right? And Johnson lives openly with a free black woman and has children. This is in Kentucky, right? In the 1840s, 30s and 40s, and lives openly and legally recognized these black kids as his children. Now, he comes from sort of the rougher portion, the like frontiersmen type of people like this, and so he has a popularity amongst like working, like the dirt farmer Southerners, right? So, but when they get to the vote in the Senate, 5 electors from Virginia, aristocrats who own slaves, won't vote for him, right? So in the Electoral College. So it goes to the Senate and he wins there. So that's really deep trivia, isn't it? He also happens to be my favorite. If you look up his story, this is just an interesting guy. He had a nickname. In those days, they used to do nicknames, you know, Tippy Canoe and Tyler too, that sort of thing, right? Old Hickory, Polk was Young Hickory, that kind of stuff. Johnson, his nickname was Rumsey Dumpsey Johnson. Rumsey Dumpsey Johnson, right? In the campaign, they put out like a little poem, and it's Rumsey Dumpsey killed Tecumseh. The Indian leader Tecumseh, who's killed during the War of 1812, right? Johnson was leading the group of militiamen or whatever that ambushed Tecumseh and his guys, and he is said to have killed Tecumseh. So he gets his first sort of notoriety because of that, right? Rumsey Dumpsey, and of course, his presidential running mate, Van Buren, is okay. The term okay comes from Martin Van Buren, right? And their slogan was, Van Buren is okay. What does okay stand for? Old Kinderhook, which is the name of his estate, upstate New York, somewhat near Albany, right? And so his nickname was Old Kinderhook, right? And so you get that term, Van Buren is okay. So that's where okay comes from. Isn't that weird? Right. And then the youngest vice president, you might not know, John Breckinridge of Kentucky. He was in the Confederate cabinet. He was a general in the Confederate Army. He ran against Lincoln in one of the three or four people who ran against Lincoln in 1860. Right? So John Breckinridge, 36 years old. You had to be 35 to be vice president. The oldest to take over when he became vice president was Alvin Barkley. He was the vice president for Harry Truman. Alvin Barkley was a friend of Harry Truman from the Senate. Truman was from Missouri, and right next door is Kentucky. And Alvin Barkley, a senator from Kentucky, he said, "Hey, Alvin, you want to like be VP? We can get along well." And that's exactly what happened.
How old was he?
He was 71. Oh, age 71. And Breckinridge was 36.
Wasn't Cheney old?
Then? No.
I mean, Cheney was VP.
No, he was VP.
Yeah,
But he wasn't 71 when he became VP. I don't think he was 71 when he left VP either. He's 84 now, that says, so you can do like math backwards, right? But 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, he was 64.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. All right, let me just show you the handout here before you go home. What do you have to carry home with you?
Oh, good.
right? No, it's not longer, okay? Mentions, the first page is mentions of the vice president in the Constitution. So if you get out your little Constitution, you can find this. Article 1, Section 3, VP casts the tiebreaker. Even before the president's state. Article 2, Section 1, VP is the one with the second number of votes.
Oh, okay.
I will get to this. This is how I'm going to end this, I guess. Right? Until the constitutional amendment in 1804, right? The person with the most every elector got 2 votes. You could cast 2 for the same guy, split them, whatever you want, but whoever got the most votes was president, and second most votes was vice president. I'm going to show you on another one of these pieces of paper why that was a bad idea. In 1804, they changed it. The electors have separate votes, as they do today. You cast one of your votes for who you want to be president, one with vice president. Okay? You don't really have a legal requirement to. Electors sign a piece of paper, and people have been sued for violating this, saying to your party, you sign a pledge that you will actually pick the candidate that you're pledged to vote for, right? So anyway, 2 separate VP votes. 20th Amendment, the lame duck amendment. This is when they changed the date of the inauguration from March 4th to January 20th, right? Section 1, there were new dates for the opening of Congress and inauguration. Section 3, change to the wording of presidential succession. You can look at this, but it makes it clear, more wording about removing for disability. This is in reaction to Wilson being president for so long and disabled. He was, for the history of the world, he was disabled during the vote for the United States to join the League of Nations. And as such, he was unable to defend this, and the United States did not join the League of Nations, which you can see as at least aiding the entities that caused World War II. Wilson is out of touch, completely out of touch. You can read about it. It is abominable. Right? From the time I was in college and was reading seriously, I hated Wilson, not just for this, but for a bunch of other stuff. Right?
Well, he segregated the civil service.
Oh, yes. I mean, he was a racist, he was a sexist, he was just, But he was considered to be extraordinary at the time because he did some things that were very different. He was a progressive, But anyway, personally, I found him, as early as the 60s, I was disliking this guy big time. All right. So, and then the 25th Amendment, motivated by the JFK assassination, right? 4 sections about removal, vacancy. The big fear was, you remember, Kennedy is shot, right? How long does it take him to die? What if he doesn't die? What if he just sits in the Bethesda Naval Hospital with a bullet in his head, but he doesn't die? At what point does Johnson get to be the president, right? And so they wanted to really clarify that. Like, there were some people saying, so Johnson, in the Air Force One, going back, you've seen the pictures with Jackie Kennedy and the body and all, and his friend, the woman friend of his, who was a judge in Texas, is swearing him in on the plane. But there was a question of, really, was that constitutional? There were no objections. Kennedy was going to be dead, soon. But there was some issues, so they wanted to clarify this in. And the other thing is, if there's a vacancy in the vice presidency, until 1967, it just stayed vacant. You didn't get to pick a VP, right? And that comes into play, not with a death, but when Nixon resigns, right, you get Ford, right? And then there's then Ford, who was the VP, because, anyway, he's not the VP now, he's the president, so they replace him with Nelson Rockefeller. This had been a big hole from the very beginning. No way to replace the VP. Interesting, that kind of thing. And resumption of the office by the original president. The question is, if the president gets sick and he is not president and the VP takes over, is there a system for the president to say, I'm okay now, right? I want to take it back. They set up a system for that, right? You can see that happen. All right. Then you've got 2 pages of lots and lots of these details. What I did was here, I put in the state names, the abbreviations for state names, right? For the vice presidents and the presidents, so you can see like ticket balancing. The ticket balancing was often north and south or east and west, also sometimes ideologically, more liberal, more conservative, right? Dukakis tried that. This Austin to Boston thing, right? Dukakis and Lloyd Benson, right? Dukakis is about as liberal a governor as you can get. I love Dukakis, right? He wanted to fix the T, anyway, and he used to ride it to work, you know. Anyway, but he's the most liberal guy here, right, that you could possibly have. So to leaven that, they pick a conservative, big oil senator from Texas, Lloyd Benson. It was like almost like a joke. It was ridiculous, you know. And so anyway, so you have that. Then I just want to, last thing, in case we get here. This is utter junky thing, and I won't try to drive this into the ground. But this thing about the electoral votes. Electoral votes in some early elections. So Washington and Adams, you'll see 69 for Washington, Adams gets 34, and others get 35. So that's 34 and 35 is 69, which means that there were 69 electors. All right? So, okay. In the second one, Washington gets 132, Adams gets 77, George Clinton gets 50, and others get 5. No big deal. Not really a contested election. It's a contested for vice president, but not for president. Third election, and this is the one where it first goes haywire. By 1796, it's the first contested election. Jefferson, and despite Washington saying we shouldn't have divisions in the country, factions are bad and all that, by 1796 you've got 2 distinct parties, the Jeffersonians and the Federalists, right? Adams gets 71 votes, Jefferson 68, Thomas Pinckney of South Carolina 59, Aaron Burr 30, and others get 48. So Adams squeaks through. Who's the vice president of the United States?
The runner-up in those days.
Yeah. So who is Adams' vice president? Jefferson. This really was like, if we still had this, Trump's president and Hillary Clinton's vice president.
Right.
Okay, this is a problem. These guys who used to be friends back in the days of the Declaration of Independence, back in 1776, are now really snarling enemies. Jefferson doesn't go to Washington at all. He hangs out in Virginia. In his, that's another place to go. Jefferson's home, Monticello, yeah. But anyway, that's where he hangs out. He don't want anything to do with it. So the next election, 1800, both sides are really organized. Jefferson gets 73 votes, Aaron Burr gets 73 votes, Adams gets 65, C.C. Pinckney gets 64, John Jay gets 1. All right. What does this mean? Who's the president?
Goes to the House.
Yeah, right? This is a screw-up. Each of the, they were called Democratic Republicans by this time, each of those electors cast 1 for Jefferson and 1 for Burr. They were the 2 candidates from their party, right? Now who's president? Well, it goes to the House and famous story, right? The Federalists right? The election, the new Congress hasn't taken place, so the Federalists control the House of Representatives. Who are they going to pick? Hamilton's not in the Congress, but he's the most influential Federalist. So they go to him and say, who should you vote for? Now, famously, Hamilton and Jefferson battled about everything. But Hamilton hates Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr and him both grew up in New York City at the same time. They were the two smartest boys in the class. They were both lawyers, famous, etc. Right? They have sort of different backgrounds. Hamilton, who sort of prided himself as being an illegitimate child growing up in Sugar Islands, his father actually sent him to what was King's College, which is now Columbia, and paid for him. So he did grow up in poverty, but he, tries to do that. He marries Elizabeth Schuyler. Her father is the richest guy in New York, who gets all his money, a huge amount of his money in the slave trade. But so you watch Hamilton, that silly thing, the Lin Miranda thing, and Hamilton doesn't have slaves, but Jefferson does. But where's Hamilton's money? Anyway, that's another thing. He hates Burr personally, and Burr hates him. For years, they've hated each other's guts. Hamilton says, go for Jefferson. So now Burr is vice president. Now, Burr isn't mad at Jefferson. Burr is mad as hell at Hamilton. And you know about the duel. Duel takes place in Weehawken, New Jersey, not in New York. It was illegal to have duels in New York City at that time. So they row across the river to Jersey. If you are in New York and you go to it's the Intrepid, I think, the battleship from World War II that's parked in the harbor there, and you stand on that battleship and you look over to Jersey, you see a little height. That's Weehawken, New Jersey. I used to tell my students that two famous things happened in Weehawken. One was the duel between Hamilton and Burr, and the other one was I was born in Weehawken. So, anyway, says that on my passport, honest to God. So I just wanted to show you just really quickly as we get here. You might say, well, why did I stop? The fifth election is sort of straightened out now, and it's not even close. The sixth election and all these other ones are not close. Until 1824, there's a close election. 4 candidates. John Quincy Adams, the sitting president. Andrew Jackson, famous war hero, senator from Tennessee. I mean, really famous populist hero. William Crawford, who was a well-known at the time, kind of heroic figure from Georgia. And Henry Clay, perennial candidate for president. Okay, so there's the breakdown, right, well, Jackson doesn't get the majority vote, so it has to go to the House of Representatives. One thing you might notice here, and say, why does he have these numbers on the side, in case, right? This is the first election where you have anything that we would recognize as a popular vote. This is the first election where the electors are not selected by the state legislatures, but by the vote of the people through an electoral vote. 1824. So, the biggest thing about, there's the phrase Jacksonian democracy, the age of Jackson. The biggest thing was that property qualifications, which existed from colonial times, right, were taken away. You had to be male 21, right, white, but property qualifications were taken away. Before this, you had to have property qualifications. You had to pay a certain amount of taxes based on essentially real estate taxes to qualify, and those could be set by your state legislatures, right? This is the first real democratic election. Now, it goes to the House. This is, again, last story here, but in the House, the Speaker of the House is Henry Clay, right? Henry Clay. Clay hates Jackson, right? And he likes, this is John Quincy Adams, who's a nicer fella interpersonally than John Adams, who's a really irascible character. John Quincy Adams was just like a wonderful man, huge accomplishments in his life. If you've ever seen the movie Amistad, you know, he and Jimmy Carter vie for the most useful post-presidency career.
Oh, yeah.
John Quincy Adams goes back, gets elected back to the House from Quincy, quite a step down, and he fights for years and years and years for abolition. Right? Gag rule, they stop him from talking, all this sort of thing. Anyway, so Clay tells his boys, vote for John Quincy Adams. Jackson is howling mad. Now, Jackson is always mad, almost all the time. Really. You know, all those duels and everything. There were 2 bullets that they couldn't pull out of. If you watch this death by lightning thing, Garfield dies from the medical treatment, not from the bullets. He could have lived with the bullets in him. Jackson lives with 2 bullets in him. Different kind of bullets. Jackson's bullets are lead bullets, and the talk by medical personnel is that he was maddened by lead poisoning. He had a volcanic temper. He'd just yell at everybody all the time, scream at people. He was just like a madman. And anyway, he's really mad. Now, the ticket to the presidency in those days was being the Secretary of State, was not being the Vice President. And Henry Clay gets appointed, what? Secretary of State by John Quincy Adams. And Jackson calls this the corrupt part, right? And this is basically where I'm going to end. One of the more notable things, presidents put a picture of their famous president, favorite president, or at least the guy that they want to model themselves after, right behind the Resolute desk, right? Reagan had Calvin Coolidge. Obama had Abraham Lincoln. Trump, in the first term, Andrew Jackson. Now, it was quite possible that Trump couldn't pass any of my history tests that I gave out to high school kids. Right? I mean, probably not. Right? I mean, just like nothing. When was Jackson president? Well, you know, maybe he knows that he's on a denomination of the bill. They tell him, if you want to get a guy like you, it's Jackson. Right? Emotional populism. Populism appeals to your emotion, not to your reason. Right? And, you know, the Jefferson in Declaration of Independence, which I can give big lectures on, which I'm not going to do here. But where do our rights come from? They're endowed by us, by our Creator. The Enlightenment thinkers said that God, they believed in not in an interventionist God. It's like the force. God creates you with the abilities to solve your problems. Go for it. He's not going to intervene. And so how do you solve your problems? Through the use of reason. You figure things out. Right? Now the reactionaries say reason is a trickster. You can be tricked. Right? So a salesman comes, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. My wife and I recently switched to a TV service that turned out, the guy was great. Reason's a trickster. The only thing that's authentic is your emotions, because they come from in you. They don't come from outside. They come from in you. So the populists understand that the way to sway the crowds is to appeal to the gut, not to the reason. Right? And so, you know, Jackson's a model of that. Right? Now, he does good things in terms of equality, but if you do The Age of Jackson, one of the great history books, if you're ever looking for one, there's something called The Age of Jackson, Arthur Morris Schlesinger. It's written in the 50s. It is just like one of the most extraordinary books. But it's, you know, it just is the good and the bad of Jackson. Monumental figure. Another place very interesting to go. It's right outside of Nashville, the Hermitage. It's Jackson's homestead, right? And Jackson was poor, like really dirt poor. This wasn't like a fake story, right? And, you know, works his way up. His wife teaches him to read while he's a senator. But just kind of an amazing guy, but, you know, fiercely racist. And he hates the rich people. He hates the bankers in Philadelphia.
Indians.
Well, oh yeah, I mean, his reputation is made by being an Indian fighter, right? And of course, you got the Trail of Tears, where they take the 5 civilized tribes, right, in Georgia and Cherokee and the Creeks and those people, and what they did was they called the civilized tribes because they tried to accommodate themselves to the white way of living,
Yeah.
and lived in cabins and had white man's agriculture, even had some black slaves dressed like white people. This is, if you know, the 1830s, and Jackson wants to pay off his political supporters in Georgia, the backwoodsman guys, and there are 2 Supreme Court cases that Jackson loses, Worcester versus Georgia and Cherokee versus Georgia. 2 times John Marshall strikes down this usurpation, just white men just taking the Indians' land, and they just move the troops in. Jackson says, John Marshall has made his ruling, now let me see him enforce it. So, you know, if you want to see a wild man, Jackson is incredible. You know, just like the stories of Jackson are just marvelous, you know, it's almost like an epic figure, you know, like something from the ancient Greeks. It is 2 minutes past time. Anybody have a last question? Can I go? No, I understand. Yes.
When's your next presentation?
It's exact date, I think the second Tuesday in December. Same time here. It's the Great Depression and the New Deal.
Okay.